Before I invite our guest speaker up here, I have a few acknowledgements to make. Well, first of all, this event is generously sponsored by the Visiting Scholar Grant provided by the Association for Chinese Art History with the support of the Beishan-Tang Foundation in Hong Kong. The Association for Chinese Art History, since its establishment in 2022, has fostered communication and community among scholars of Chinese art and architectural history. The association supports research, teaching, and conference panels and offers valuable opportunities for mentoring, dialogue, and learning. So everyone is welcome to join it and explore the rich resources provided on its website. So a little context of the public lecture today. I'm teaching a seminar on Ming Dynasty art in the department today, and Dr. Kindall is invited here not only to give the public lecture, but also to provide mentorship and suggestions for my students, which we are very grateful for. Okay. And I would also like to gratefully acknowledge the support of the art department at Wake Forest University, especially with coordinating and technology stuff. So we have Claudia there helping us to record the lectures. So if any of the friends want to save labor, we will have a recorded version online. Okay. So without further ado, here is a little bit bio of our guest speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Kindall. Dr. Elizabeth Kindall is an associate professor of art history at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. Her research expertise lies in Chinese painting from the 14th to the 18th centuries. Her current project centers on filial culture, landscape identity, and portrayals of the Yunnan mountain regions in Chinese painting. And she has published widely, including in prestigious journals such as the Art Bulletin. And her book, Narratives of a Filial Song, The Paintings of Huang Xiangjian, was a finalist for the Charles Rufus Murray Book Award in 2016, which you will learn about through her talk in a minute. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Kindall.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yes.
Well, I would like to thank Dr. Gao for inviting me. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you to the Art Department of Wake Forest for having me. Really glad to see you all, whether you're here out of interest or for extra credit. I'm still glad you're here. And no matter why you're here, I would like to introduce you to a specific, really interesting painter of the late Ming Dynasty. Before I begin, how is the sound? Is that all okay? Everybody can hear me back there? You're good? Okay, great. So here he is, Huang Xiangjian. Isn't he charming? This is a later Qing dynasty rendering of him. We don't know how he looked. This is an imaginary portrait of the gentleman known as Huang Xiangjian, and he is the person I'd like to speak to you about today. There are his dates, and for all of you Ming scholars, you know that his life spans the Ming dynasty, and then he lives on into the next dynasty, the Qing dynasty, the last dynasty of China, right? So in today's talk, I want to relate Huang's story. So I'm going to tell his story using his own painting and his writings. So I'll introduce you to his story, and then I want to examine his fame and filiality in relation to his painting. All right? So that's the plan for today. Now, a really fun element of Huang's painting is that usually you can find Huang in his painting. So this is a little bit of a Chinese Where's Waldo experience for you, right? Do you see him here?
Yes.
Where, Raying? Thank you, Dr. Gao. Excellent. All right, A for Dr. Gao for the day. Excellent, there he is. So as I'm telling the story, please feel free to find him. Sometimes he's alone, sometimes he's with his family, all right? So he seems at first to be an average gentleman. He was a late Ming dynasty gentleman. He was educated, he was elite, he was literate. He ran in a higher echelon of social circles. He was the son of Huang Kongzhao and his father, of course, of this same echelon, and they were educated gentlemen of Suzhou. So what did that entail? First of all, that means they are southern gentlemen. This is a view of Chong Gate, the Chong Gate area in Suzhou. This was a very well-known area to see someone off for a government position or to stop by and buy some goods. This was where everybody kind of traveled in and out of this gate. This is one of the major gates of Suzhou. And you can also see the landscape of Suzhou, the Suzhou area, the south generally. Hopefully you get an idea that it's kind of misty and wet and beautifully soft rolling hills. It's a very lovely, lovely area of China. So what was late Ming Suzhou like for an educated, literate gentleman like Huang Xiangjian? Well, it was a great time. It was a time when you could mingle with a lot of different types of people. Right? So you could belong to a literary society, you could belong to a charitable organization, you could belong to a Buddhist study group, you could visit people and meet at their personal libraries, you could attend a government-sponsored school, you could have your own tutor if you wished. You could go to shopping districts, you could attend festivals, and of course there was private and public art viewings. Private, of course, you would understand just with a friend. By public, I really mean that you would be in a larger group of people in someone's house or something of that nature. Not that there were museums per se, but there were more public viewings of art as well at this time. And it's likely that the Huang family, both father and son, participated in all of these activities and more, right? So this is hopefully the idea of all these things that they did gives you an idea of kind of these overlapping cultural networks that we have in this late Ming period. So you have this urban, suburban, educated elite, and they're moving between all of these different types of groups of people, although they're still kind of aligning themselves with traditional categories. You know, they're an official, or they're a merchant, or they're a gentry, or they're a student, but it's much more, we would say, complex than that, in all dynasties, but particularly in the late Ming, right? So in his early life, just an average gentleman of this time period, it's likely that he participated in the activities of most 20 and 30-somethings, and that revolved around supposedly preparing for the examinations. So the public, the examinations to be a government official is something that most people were preparing to pass at that very high level, that high echelon. But very few people did, as you can see from the statistics. You know, you said that you were studying for the exams, but it was likely you would not pass. So he was probably one of about 50,000 candidates throughout China. And they're competing, as you see, for 1,300 provincial level degrees, and that's not even the highest level of degree. So you would pass these examinations and then you would be placed in some type of a government position. But very few people made it that far in the Ming. Most people did not pass those exams because there were just too many people competing at the time, and particularly in the South, where there was a large number of these higher level elite literate people. So as part of this role of, you know, the student, the scholar, he likely created paintings. He probably did paint, Huang Xiangjian probably did paint, but for social occasions, what I would call occasional painting, right? So he would get together with his friends and they would meet for a picnic, or they would meet at someone's house, they would chat, and perhaps to document the event, he would paint a little painting. He would write a little something on it and give it to the person later, or perhaps it was even created for the event, right, as they got together. So that's likely how he painted as a gentleman of Suzhou. And he used his paintings to cement important relationships for him, because he likely was not going to pass the official examinations, and so it was really important who he knew and how he moved through society, and this was a way for him to make those really, you know, solidify those relationships. And he painted works like this. This is one of our early works that he created at this time. It's a perfectly lovely painting. It's a very nice fan painting. Would I say it's, you know, something that I would teach as a masterpiece to my students as indicative of this era? No, but it's something that many people painted. It's a very nice painting. He has lovely brushwork. We see that he's even provided us with two people that maybe one could associate as being him and the friend that they had had their social outing together with. He does water quite well, nice and splashy. Certainly this really isn't a Suzhou landscape, you know, it's a make-believe landscape with mildly high little kind of mountain hillock areas and a pine tree. In fact, 2 pine trees that likely represent the 2 figures standing below because they are stalwart like pines, as I'm sure many of you have studied as well. So this is the type of painting that he was making for these social occasions. And then everything changes. Everything in Huang Xiangjian's life changes. He has very unique circumstances in that his father is appointed to become a district magistrate in Dayao, Yunnan. And if you're familiar with the territory of Yunnan, it's very different from Suzhou, and not only that, but Yunnan is really far away from Suzhou. And so Huang Xiangjian does take up this appointment. He likely didn't pass the exams either, and this was an appointment that was given to him. So he takes up this appointment and he says goodbye, and Chang Gate is also where many people said goodbye, a place of parting. You see a gentleman in blue here bowing, and there's all of the singing girls in the band and all of the officials saying goodbye as he leaves to take off his particular appointment. This painting is not by, I should clarify, not by Huang Xiangjian, but it's such a great painting I have to bring it in as we say goodbye to Huang Xiangjian, and he leaves to go to Yunnan. So you can see the trajectory that Huang Xiangjian travels. He goes with his wife, so both Huang Xiangjian loses both his father and his mother and his nephew, and they travel from Suzhou down to Yunnan. They leave in 1643. For those of you that are familiar with the dates of the Ming, you know what's going to happen next. It's not good, right? So a year after he arrives in Yunnan, the dynasty falls. He's gotten this fantastic appointment. He's had it about a year. Everything is in turmoil. You have the Qing take over, the Manchu troops take over in the north, and then they're going to move down into the south. So that's why I have in 1644 the Ming dynasty begins to fall, right? No dynasty just takes over an entire area, right? They start in one place and they make their way down. And you see with the red and the gold flags, these are all Ming dynasty court holdouts at different places. These are all different people related to the throne, the Ming throne in some way, and they've started this little court and they're going to try and hang on for the Ming in the south. So you see, as the Qing troops take over this area and they start marching down, all of these different little courts try to prevail and hold out. So not long after Huang Xiangjian and his family, they go down to Yunnan, and the Ming falls in the north. Suzhou falls not long after. So Huang Xiangjian is living with Qing, the Qing dynasty in control, and then, of course, these Ming courts in the farther south area. So think about it, 8 years without contact with your parents. That's how long that Huang Xiangjian goes without hearing from his parents. He doesn't know if they're alive or dead. He doesn't know what's going on with them. He doesn't know if they're trying to come home. He knows nothing. And so he is a very filial son. And in 1652, he decides to leave and to find his parents. He leaves his own family. He leaves his wife, his children. It's a very, very sad moment as he says goodbye to his family, and he leaves Suzhou in search of his parents. He travels over 558 days, over 2,800 miles. He leaves on foot. Sometimes he goes by boat. Usually it's on foot. And it's not a straight line, as I've shown you there, right? It's not a straight line. Even when you present this on Google Maps, you can see that they have you walking along all through these different areas, as you can see. And he's not just going the length of China. We're going to move out a little bit in a minute from Google Maps here, and you can see, I mean, he's going the length and down south, right? Can you imagine walking all of that way? He was a very filial son, yes? And not only is he walking and taking boats, but he's not walking on nice, flat, plain areas. He's walking through this kind of a landscape, and he does not have a minivan, right? He is just walking. He's trying to find boats. He's trying to find his way. He's going through bamboo forests. He's going through areas with these huge caves and these amazing mountainscapes. This is a tourist video, right? This is making it look fun and exciting. This was not fun and exciting for Huang. It was really scary to someone from the south to go into the southwest. These amazing kind of mountainscape forms, all of this water, and these waterfalls, so beautiful and amazing to us now, but you're not having to travel through it, right? And in addition to this, he's also dealing with bandits on the road. He's got native peoples, which people from the south and the north thought were really scary and fierce. He deals with man-eating tigers. He believed that the regions he was traveling through carried disease. He actually traveled through an earthquake at one time. In our lifetimes, we've heard about the earthquakes in Sichuan. He moves through Sichuan during an earthquake, and you can see this landscape of mountains just goes off into the horizon. Can you imagine? He certainly was a filial son. And this is another of his paintings of his journey. Have you found him? You see him?
Yes.
Excellent. Yes, there he is. He often is traveling with an umbrella. Sometimes he has it as his side. It kind of looks like a pilgrim's staff, which I think is very symbolic, right? And sometimes he has it up as an umbrella. So here are some of his renderings of these same elements that I was talking about that he traveled through. There were native peoples, and often he depicts their villages up on mountain tops. And then occasionally you'll get a little glimpse of some of these native peoples as well. And here are two of them right here. And they have their spears and they're guarding the entrance, right, to climb up to the mountain village where they live. Remember, he's traveling in wartime as well, right? So this is a really interesting painting of troops. My guess is that these are Southern Ming troops. We have an entire little encampment here with horses and soldiers. One of the reasons that I think that these are Southern Ming troops is because as we move through, this is a hand scroll on the other side. Can you make out what those are? Yeah, they're war elephants, right? So war elephants were known to be used by some of the troops that were aligning with these Southern Ming courts. And you got to fit about 5 soldiers onto each elephant, which is, I think, quite interesting, at least in the way that Huang renders them. Huang also leaves us inscriptions on his paintings to capture this adventure, and I think this is a good one that captures what it was like to move through these soldiers and the elephants. After going through Qinguan, I passed through Baikopo, where soldiers on elephants blocked the road. I was unable to get by them, and I had to wait for them to examine my papers before they would release me. So I stayed on here temporarily. Not only did that give me anxious thoughts, but I was extremely afraid because that day I had to walk a gauntlet through these armed soldiers. And this is constantly happening to him. He comes into an encampment and the soldiers, he doesn't know if they're Qing, he doesn't know if they're Southern Ming, they need to see his papers are Qing, but he was a former Ming citizen, he's trying to find his father who was serving the Ming. It's a nightmare. Every time, he doesn't know if he's gonna live or die, every time. He is moving through these disease-infested regions. This was the idea about the Southwest at the time, is that all of those mists, all of those clouds carried malaria. They carried these diseases that as you walked through them, you would ingest that and it would make you sick. And this is an example of him and his family. You can see them coming out there through these mists. Just when you think he's had enough, no, he's traveling during the Little Ice Age. So in this period, one would not expect there to be snow in Guizhou, a southwestern area, and yet there is snow, there is ice. It's a very challenging time. And he captures this as well in an inscription that is related to this site. This is the border between Guizhou and Yunnan, and he's going to describe that in this inscription where he writes, "When we arrived at the arch that marks the scenic frontier of Yunnan," and that was that arch right here, "there was a heavy snow falling. This is where you enter Guizhou. everywhere. There are poisonous bamboo groves and precipitous peaks and cliffs, and even in the daytime you run into malarial mists on the roads. As the proverb says, the heavens never have 3 days of fair weather, the earth never has 3 li of level ground. So because of the rigors of the road, we did not dare sing as we walked. So you would think, did he even make it? Yes, he did. He does. He makes it all the way there. Here he is, one of his final stops on the way to Dayao, Yunnan. He makes his way there. He arrives in the town. He asks, are my parents here? He finds out where their house is. They are said to still be alive, and he rushes to the house, right? It's been 8 years now. He has long hair. His hair has been growing out. He's sunburned. He's suffering from an eye disease at the time. He is almost unrecognizable, as you will see in a moment. This is, to me, the most kind of heart-rending part of his story, which he has written down for us to hear. In his diary, he writes, "When I entered the gate, all was quiet. Our old maidservant was the only person in sight. What with my disheveled hair, for a minute she sat as we stared fixedly at each other until she recognized me. Then she cries out loudly in astonishment, 'Our young gentleman has come.' In disbelief, my mother said, 'It can't be.' By then, I had come up the hall where I dropped my knapsack and shouted, 'Father, Mother.' Father was taking an afternoon nap and had not yet woken up. Startled, he jumped up hastily, asking who it was. Again and again, my mother shouted back, 'Our son has come.' Father, too, could not believe it. And as I rushed into his bedroom, he mumbled something from his dream and rubbed his eyes, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, our eyes met, and I threw myself onto the ground in front of his bed. We embraced and wept so uncontrollably that we could not stand. We finally got up by leaning against one another, sobbing the whole time." That's always a hard one for me to get through. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? It's hard to imagine. He arrives. He has found his family. Now what? What do? You turn around and you go home. You've got to get them back home to Suzhou. That's where they're from. That's where they want to die. That's where their clan is located. That's so important. So they have to go home. So what does Huang do? He talks with his family. They come up with a plan. He travels around the area. He chats with all of his father's friends, and he raises money. Right, they talk about what's happening, and their friends say, "Let me just give you a little something," right? That was the way you did it. That was the socially appropriate thing to do. They raise enough money, and he puts the old people in sedan chairs, and they start back. And so the images of them returning home, it's always the father and mother in the sedan chairs, and Huang and his cousin walking along beside them. And sometimes there are porters, which never show up in his diaries, but sometimes they've hired people to help them carry things. And here is what they arrive home to. Nothing. There's nothing left. There is nothing. The Qing troops, the Qing government has taken over their house. They never write about what happened to Huang Xiangjian's family. We don't know. There are no records. He comes home to nothing. Here is what he writes at the last ending of his diary, the final words he writes. "We had prayed sincerely and been blessed by heaven, yet only the walls of our house were left standing, and not one grain remained in the storage jars. That my parents have no way to enjoy their old age causes me, their son, the greatest shame." After all of this, he's ashamed because he has no way to provide for them. So what are they supposed to do? Now we're going to talk about art. That's the story. So let's talk about what he does in relation to art. He is going to rely upon what was happening in the late Ming to help his family survive in the early Qing. He's going to construct and publicize a specific societal role. And we talked about how all of these roles, you could move between different roles in late Ming society, and he's going to choose one particularly to lean into. So as we talked about, most educated citizens of the late Ming in Suzhou, they had these multiple societal roles, and you could choose and construct any one, but you could have one that you particularly identified with, one defining identity, right? And many literate gentlemen and ladies as well chose their calligraphic, their painting skills to support themselves. This was not uncommon. This was not considered inappropriate at all. In fact, there were this common vocabulary applied to this called farming with the brush, right? Or your inkstone rice field. This is the way that you made your money. And Gui Zhuang, who was a family friend, actually used this. He used this form of role to support his family. And he explains it to us in a part of his essay called On Farming with the Brush. In my family, from the time of my ancestor who sold his writings to the time of my father who sold his calligraphies and paintings, it has been several generations that we have farmed with our brushes in order to be self-supporting. Since the ruin of our family during the Great Turmoil, meaning the fall of the Ming, right, in 1644, and the passing of my father, I have fallen prey to hardships and starvation, and more than once was at death's door. In the last few years, as I have made a small name with my writing, as well as with my calligraphy and painting, people have begun to come to buy them. My daily food depends on these demands for my literary and artworks. So this is what Huang Xiangjian and his family, I believe, decide to do. They are going to transform him not just into a filial son, everybody had to be a filial son, but into a filial son. That's his identity, right? So why would you choose this particular role? Why not just be known as a great painter, right, or something like that? Well, if you were given this title of filial son, you could get gifts of rice and money. This is a great way to survive. You might receive a government appointment, particularly, and there are plenty of social benefits as well. So you're known as a filial son. Surely everyone in town is going to have their children study with you. They want their child to be filial. You're quite erudite. You would be the person they would choose, right? So there are many benefits to earning this title, being known as a filial son. So in looking at Huang's work, I really see a concerted effort, what I'm calling a campaign, to create this identity for him of a filial son. So he has these diaries, and I don't know if he took notes on the trip and then wrote them up when he came home, or if he really kept diaries as he traveled. I don't really know. But he has very detailed diaries where he tells you what he's doing every day on his journey out to find his parents and on his journey back. So he takes those, and his friends write up essays about him and the diaries and what he accomplished with this journey in little essay form, and all of that is printed together. And that is a way of publicizing his work to a large group of people, as we were just talking about in the Ming seminar, right? As we were talking about how print is a way to get to so many more people than painting. So that's one way that this campaign, I think, really gets out there. And the other is painting, as he uses his paintings. And these, I think, are a little more private, but certainly allows his name to spread as well. So let me introduce you to the structure of the paintings and the inscriptions that he wrote for them, and then we'll see how those fit into the filial campaign. The painting characteristics that we see in his work, we always have Huang alone or with his family on the journey. He's always there. We can always find him. These are dramatic views of topography. For those of you that have been studying with Dr. Gao, the Ming, these are pretty dramatic, right? This is not your everyday kind of Ming painting. And you have a short inscription where he tells you what's going on. So this is a classic example of the type of paintings that Huang produced. And there he is, walking over this, vertiginous bridge, right? What the heck? And then water beneath him, and this mountainscape that goes up into the clouds. You don't know where it ends. Here's the inscription. And in the inscriptions, he gives you the general location where he is. He tells you what happened there. He gives you a little incident that occurred there. He talks about how he felt. We've already seen that. Usually he's terrified. And then he'll mention a historical person or some kind of a phrase, usually for people to associate with. So in looking at these paintings and writings, one of the things that really sold to me that these are him attempting to become a filial son is they align with a lot of elements that we see in classic filial piety tales in China, traditional tales. So in a classic filial piety tale, you have an emphasis on the person's character, how filial they are in their heart, right? And then you have an example of their filial act, what they did to prove their filial. And then they have a heroic story. It's not just that they're, a filial person. It's that they did something above and beyond, right? They didn't just succor a parent back to health, right? They, cut off their arm and cooked it for them because that would make them more, live and survive, right? So these diaries, one called The Journey in Search of My Parents and the other Diary of the Return from Yunnan, were published in 1655, and at the end of them were these colophons by the friends. I think, do you see Huang here? Are you still finding him in these paintings? You remember to look for him? Yeah. Okay. All right, there he is, right? There he is. And the inscriptions, certainly as well as his written diaries, highlight his filial character. So he's constantly thinking about his parents in these inscriptions. He's talking about how his actions are filial. It's all for them. And he's quoting from classic filial texts as well. So let's read this particular inscription that he writes onto Lee Peak, okay? So Lee Peak Station, that's where we are. One climbs up the Guanshuo mountain range on a long, narrow, and winding path, a twisting path amidst 1,000 peaks. Although the Guizhou region is the most precipitous area in which to dwell, there is a temple in the mountain range. The son of the Marquis Ting of Hanshou once held this place. To this day, the temple is impressive to look at. The tablet over the entrance has a 4-character inscription, "Great possessor of his father's spirit. When I passed by here, I was near the point of total exhaustion." Xiangjian. So it's got all of the elements, right? Very filial, all of it filial. Where he is, what he's doing, how he feels, even a comparison of him and his father to these great historic figures, right? So how do the paintings reinforce this idea that Huang's life has become this kind of classic filial piety tale? Well, I suggest that they introduce his character, they narrate his filial acts, and then they present his journey as this heroic odyssey, right? So his character, first of all, I think is very easy to glean by looking at these different examples. There's a closer view. Midway across the stream, he's in that boat, one of those guys. We know he is. And I think his character is illustrated because we have this juxtaposition of these tiny figures, and they're contending with everything, right? His character is contending, he's showing that he has the character to deal with natural, social, and political elements for his parents. That is his character. He's willing to do that, right? Here's another inscription to give you an idea of that. Qinglong Military Station town was on a dangerous peak above a river. The wild water of this river was even greater than at the celestial ditch, the upper Yangtze. It was difficult to row the oars of the boat. Between the 2 cliffs, there were attached splints, and a rope was strung through these and the mast. The boatman relied on this throughout the crossing, but it was very dangerous. So once again, his character is that he does it anyway. He's super scared. He admits it right away, but he's still doing it. It doesn't matter how you feel. It matters how you do it. That's what your character, that's how that illustrates that, right? How does he show us his filial acts? Now, this was a big revelation to me when I was thinking about him, is that looking at these individual pictures, they're telling us where he is, right? And we can recognize places we may have heard of as Ming and Qing citizens in the Southwest. This is not relating his journey place by place. This is not saying, I went here, I went here, I went here. This is not a chronological view, not a geographical view of his journey. These individual paintings are not recreating his itinerary. They're not doing that. These are filial acts performed on his odyssey. These are the types of things he did. So these are showing us his filial acts, the types of filial acts he was willing to do for his parents. So we've got 10 basic types of filial acts that we see represented in his work. He's always climbing these incredibly high mountains, right? So here he is. Here he is, right? He is crossing these frighteningly deep chasms. He's fording these rushing rivers. He's moving through these dangerous flora, right? He's suffering this miserable weather. He's confronting menacing animals, always moving through these soldier checkpoints. This is an iron bridge where he had a lot of trouble. Here are these native peoples again, people native to the area, living their lives, but they had been given these very fierce reputations, and so anyone from outside of Yunnan and Guizhou were very frightened of them and thought they were going to be killed, right? Please do note the monkeys, right? Aren't those nice? He's trying to find shelter often with these very people he's frightened of, right? And so he's often moving through trying to find shelter. And a lot of the time in his diaries and in his inscriptions, he's just trying to not get lost, right? He's just trying to find his way. So our last element of a filial piety tale, a heroic odyssey, how does Huang turn this into a heroic odyssey and not just a trip, right? Well, his idea is that it was not just a filial act. He was not conventionally filial. And this is something that the people that wrote essays at the end of his diary and that were attached to the end of his diary really emphasize. He wasn't just filial. As the family friend Li Kai-shu says, he was the filial son of filial sons, right? Way beyond, way beyond. And now that we know, we can see that this is the family, mom and dad, right? And then the cousin and Huang going up this mountainscape. So to capture this in painting, how do you capture heroic filiality in painting? And I suggest that it's a landscape of extreme obstacles. And this is my favorite example of that. Do you see him? Yeah. Yeah, there he is, right? He's coming down a mountain again that we can't see the top of. The entire landscape is kind of moving. It's kind of this whole vertiginous kind of undulating mass. And just in case you wondered how far down below it was, this is a town, right? So he is really trying to emphasize how overwhelming the landscape was. We have him always in these very precarious positions within these landscapes, and the way that this is being captured in painting is that he is, Huang, in painting these, he's literally activating the landscape. So you have these big landscape forms that are kind of dominating the scene and overhangs that are looking scary over him. You have these strong diagonals that pull your eye down to the scene. They make you look at this particular place. They make you focus in on Huang after you've seen how overwhelming everything is. There's this immediacy of the predicaments. He's always in the middle of the river, right? He's never made it to the other side and resting, right? He's always halfway up the mountain. Nearly insurmountable natural elements. How will he get up that steep mountain? We don't know, right? Dangerous human interactions. We've seen him facing off with these admittedly not very scary looking elephants. I admit that, but they were very frightening to him. And then the primary challenge in the middle to lower foreground, so we know what to look at, right? We saw the elephants, we see the bridge, there's always the little river down there, we always see what he has to deal with. And then, as we have been seeing, this little bitty figure of Huang, right? This is really kind of capturing, I think, the way he felt as well. Sometimes I would argue that his movement is psychologically intense, and I've been pushing that a little bit with my discussion of the soldiers and the bandits and all of that, but this is my favorite example of that. There he is. He is walking along, and this looks pretty calm compared to some of the other paintings that we've seen, but if you look ahead, he's got some other wild animals. So we can start getting nervous with him as we see where he is and what he's going to come across. They don't look, of course, that frightening to us, but there's some type of horned things, right? And he talks about, even the deer were frightening because they didn't know to be afraid, and they would come and surround him, and he couldn't get past them. So it was, the wild animals were quite frightening for him as well. I think that the production style he used is more evidence for us that this was a filial campaign. This was a concerted effort, right? So the majority of his extant paintings he created from 1655 to 1659. So 5 years after his return from Suzhou, he created all of these paintings, right? In 1656, he did 7. In 57, he did 1. In 58, he did 2. And then we have 15 undated paintings. And a lot of those, based on the style, I would put them in that 56, 57 range. Okay. So that's a lot of work in a short period of time, as though he has a goal, right? There he is. Did you think he was down here? There he is. He's always climbing a mountain. He also has compositional types. So we're in 2 different places in these 2 paintings, right? But I think he had certain compositional types that he thought of as not only representative of the Southwest, but that he could fall back on to create these paintings. I don't think he was using the pouncing method or any kind of special, technique, but I think he had compositions in mind, right? So this is the stone village with mountain beyond composition, right? This is the minority or native village, right, on a cliff face, compositional type. Finally, I think that his production style is attested to by one comment by a family friend named Zhou Donling. And he says, I appended 2 quatrains to the end of this hand scroll. In them I said, if you want to know the places of heartache of the filial son, all are in his carefully thought out compositions. And I think that may suggest that Huang was actually, he had these certain compositions he used again and again. So I think that suggests that. I believe that the display formats that he created very much are evidence that this was a campaign as well. So, pardon me. So these gentlemen, they're looking at a hanging scroll. You see there are other hand scrolls on the table. There are albums. There are all of these different types of formats you can work in as an artist in China, right? And Huang worked in all of them as though he wanted to make sure that all of these different formats could be used in every social situation. There's an album leaf on the right. This is part of a hand scroll on the left that we've been examining. He did hanging scrolls. And a lot of the hanging scrolls that remain, there aren't that many, but the hanging scrolls that do remain, they seem to complement one another as though they would have looked good together, hung up as, a set. So there he is. There he is. So you could hang one of these hanging scrolls in the scholar's studio, as I've pretended we're doing here. You could look at album leaves in a small group. You could, in a large hall such as this, where you would have a larger social gathering, I think his paintings would look great, right? Would really complement one another, really draw your eye in, make you look at the details, but also you could get a great overview from far away. So did it work? It did work. Thank you, Dr. Gao. It did work. Our evidence, basically contemporaneous, the playwright Li Yu writes, Union over 10,000 li, an entire play was written about his story. Why not, right? I mean, it's so dramatic. There were poetry pieces written about him. Liang Qingbiao wrote a folk song poem that he talks about the family journey. And then we see later there was imperial recognition of Huang as a filial son. Zhou Donling wrote in a colophon that one of his paintings was presented to the emperor as evidence of his filiality. So in 1705, the Kangxi emperor actually saw one of Huang Xiangjian's paintings, suggesting he had attained that title. And if that wasn't enough, we do have historical written evidence. This is not the real pillar, just what it might have looked like. There was a pillar erected to filial son Huang in Liuguozi Lane in Suzhou. I've talked a lot about this being a campaign, and I don't want you to think that they didn't believe he really was a filial son. This was a very heartfelt thing as well. They were genuine in this belief, but you also had to use that so that you could survive, right? So I think that this quotation that I'd like to end with by Tao Hongzuo really captures this. He describes the Huangs in this way. We have had nobody like Huang and his father, where their father was a loyal official and the son a filial son, both in the same household. Huang's father commanded a far-off remote district. When Yunnan was lost, he gave up his position and had to plow for himself, if only to preserve himself. Huang Xiangjian went 10,000 li on foot through wilderness, wild beasts, and bristling lances to serve his parents and bring them home. Would he have been able to do this without having loyalty and filiality rooted in his heart? I would hope that all who read this will become more caring towards their rulers and fathers and not just let this admirable example go unimitated. May it be a lesson to us all. Thank you very much. In conclusion, if you're going to Hong Kong, the Pride of Hong Kong, 3 preeminent collections of ancient paintings and calligraphies, is going to be on display. It opens up in June, and Huang's paintings will be included in that exhibition. All 3 of those collections include Huang's paintings. So.
Now it's time for questions from the audience.
They thought it was over. So close. It's almost over. Don't worry. Yes?
So would he like to be considered more like professional or like part of the literary crowd? We just talked about that.
Right, yes. I love, there's an article by Robert Harrison. It's called I Do Not Know Who the Literati Were, But I Miss Them. Right? So I don't think they're really, I think it's all way too complex to say that he was a literati artist, because his paintings don't look like a literati painter's work at all, right? And I think that there were all of these other types of paintings that were circulating in Suzhou that people we might call the literati used and examined and loved, and only in the past, I'd say the 20th century has this idea that only the literati could only look at ink paintings that express themselves, right? So I think that he would have said, I don't know what you mean by literati. This is what I do. I like this kind of painting. I use this painting for this. I use this painting for this. How was that for a non-answer? Did that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think it was more complicated. Yeah. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about like what a campaign would look like? Like, is he trying to reproduce these paintings in some form? Are they distributed to people? Or
Right.
'cause I assume people aren't voting on him.
They aren't. No.
I would vote for him.
It's more of a branding exercise.
Right. Yeah. I think you become popular. I think that the printed version of his diaries, that would have been spread, and people could have bought that. People of all classes, I mean, not obviously those of the lowest classes, but they could buy them and they could read his story, and so he would have become very popular. And then I think that the paintings moved through different individual social groups, and so that's the way he kind of gained a following in those kind of more elite echelons, right? And then those also were people that served as government officials or had friends who were government officials, and then somebody says to somebody, he really should be a filial son of Suzhou. Shouldn't we get him that title? And slowly it makes his way, toward being official. And that's it's written in the gazetteer, and then suddenly he's the filial son. Yeah.
Okay, was there any recognition at all that this heroic filial son was a horrible husband?
Yeah, it's such a good point. There's not even acknowledgement of what happened to his wife. We don't know what happened to the wife or children. When he leaves, he's sad. He acknowledges his sadness. He doesn't look back, even though his children are clinging to him and crying. It's horrible. We don't know. We don't know how he took care of his family. There are many things he doesn't tell us. In fact, he doesn't tell us he was traveling with a friend the whole journey, and he never mentions him until they arrive in Yunnan. So there's a lot that's been left out.
That was more of a jokey question. But
Oh yeah, no. But I took it seriously. I think it's true.
But my actually question relates to Molly's. I was a little, so I don't really know this context, so I was curious about the art market. So would he be producing these at bulk and try to, where would you sell these paintings? Were they commission based, or kind of him going around and trying to sell paintings? Sorry, this is a really, basic question.
Right, no, it's great. It's a great question. I don't think these were sold. I don't think these were sold. I think all of these were given as gifts. And this moves back to this idea of this kind of social reciprocity idea that begins it begins much earlier, but it's very heavily on display in the late Ming, where people are doing things as gifts for one another. You know, you happen to gift a painting to, you know, your doctor, and your doctor is happy to, you know, just provide you with whatever medicine you need, that kind of thing, to, you know, more upper level kind of back and forth. So I don't think that he would have sold any of these. I think he would have given them as gifts to different people. There's another touching colophon that actually his father writes to one set that he finds in a monastery that the monks, he had given it perhaps to the abbot of the monastery, and he's looking at his father's looking at the paintings, remembering the journey. So I think they were all given and kind of seeded into these social networks, and that again was kind of how the campaign and how his reputation grew.
So the real value was not in the art, but in the persona that
Right.
created.
Right. Right, and I think, as you have all been studying in Dr. Gao's classes, I think landscape is persona, and the more I study it, the more it seems to me that that's the case. Yeah.
Such a compelling argument.
Oh,
As
good.
someone who is way outside the field.
Sure.
It raises two questions for me. One, are there other people campaigning for a particular position who are using painting to do so?
Mm-hmm.
And then, what are you up against? What are the other? How do people usually read his work?
Ah,
Because
right.
it's so compelling campaign for the filial.
Sure.
How might it otherwise?
Sure. I think, you know, people in the late Ming and the early Qing, I'm sure Dr. Gao could chime in here, everybody was going for some type of a persona. You know, there was this kind of overarching persona, and she studies women that were, you know, promoting a specific persona as well. I think is quite interesting and a great asset of the late Ming. I don't think he was like competing with anybody particularly for filial son. I think that was a tough one. It was a tough one. But there were, you know, there were many men at this time, Shanren, people that called themselves mountain men, and they had these kind of they were known as erudite, but they were also known as people that would, you know, kind of act as a connoisseur for any painting you might have available or something. So they were kind of more competing at that level. And I think Huang was kind of above them in many ways because nobody could, you know, beat that. No one could beat that. As far as what I'm going up against in terms of other readings, I'm it. That's it. No one has studied Huang. So perhaps someone will come up later and say I completely disagree, and this is what I think was what was going on. But no, it was the focus of my dissertation, and then I went on and wrote the book. And a lot of it was just trying to put his oeuvre together because no one had looked at all of his paintings. So it was a lot of really, you know, 90s traveling around to museums and seeing paintings before everything was digitized in the good old days or the bad old days, right? However you want to look at it. And trying to kind of put together who he was and then what was going on in the paintings and then why. I mean, it's kind of compelling, but why, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I actually have a question about
Louder.
when he as you said earlier, these paintings are not constructed chronologically or like for like a space. They're more like idealized geographic paintings. One thing I noticed is that the techniques in these paintings are quite different from his literary paintings. As I was thinking about when he gave these paintings as gift, or correct me if I'm wrong, it's elegant now for people who have provided money or food during his way back to Suzhou. How people think about his techniques?
That is so interesting that you ask that. I wondered if someone would say, who is he painting in the style of, right? Or what is his, and you know, people don't talk about him that way. They don't say, he reminds me of Huang Gongwang, or here is his Nizan brushwork. No one does that. They talk about him as the filial son, and that in looking at his paintings, you see the terror, or you see the frightening nature of it. He does do many ink paintings, and we certainly do associate that with the literati kind of ideal, whatever that is. But he also does color paintings. He does a number of paintings in color that you might like, since you're into Tang Dynasty color right now, I know. But he does color painting as well that's really quite spectacular. So he's not afraid to paint in color either, which is, I think, interesting. Yeah.
Because one thing I'm thinking about, like, as a gift. They more think about, because it's reputation, it's like a filial son.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of focusing more on his paintings, because one of, as you talk about, like different geographic like features in these paintings, for example, the mountains they're overlapping.
Yeah.
It really brings back like curious and more close to the important Chinese traditional paintings, like what she called it, which brings about like these kind of like parasites.
Right.
Is what I would think about, like would these kind of replications force or like foster these collectors to collect these work instead of focusing more about like these techniques or
Right.
artistic styles.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe last one.
Yeah, okay. So, for my ignorance, so are there other painters who paint them a little image of themselves in their painting?
There are other painters that do include images that we could associate them as being the person in the painting, but not to this extent. not to this extent, but. Often you will have a scholar painting or a painting where there's a scholar-looking figure, and you think, oh, we're supposed to associate that with the person that painted it or who's receiving it or something like that. For sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you.